So just before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. For everyone being muted. This is going to be recorded. If you're like me, a lot of times you sign up for things and things get in the way and you watch the recording. So I know that we get a lot of viewers that way too. So if you don't want to be on camera, then obviously, make the camera go dark. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat as we go. It's always easier to answer those questions as we go, but certainly we'll leave time at the end if you have questions about that as well. So we can hit it from both sides. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I appreciate everyone being here. Looks like we have about 17 people. This certainly is a fun topic, one that a lot of people are interested in. For those of you that don't know me, maybe you're here from a partner. I am Trent Morrow, I'm the owner of the practice LMB Counseling. We really appreciate the opportunity to come to you. We try to do this every 4 to 6 weeks with different topics. And so we've done a couple and we certainly have a few more lined up for you. And if you're subscribing to the newsletter, you'll get the updates on that and you'll end the way you did. You'll either be here live or get the recording. Today's topic it's probably one of our more popular ones. Everyone's interested in technology, and we update this talk every year. It's always different than we did the year before and the year before. And so if we did this talk last year, most of you may not have heard of ChatGPT or AI and all those things. So it's always evolving. Technology is always evolving. So this is more of a high level discussion about technology. It's not we're not going to talk about TikTok per se or Instagram or those kind of things. We can, if you want to, if you have questions about that, happy to answer those as long as I know enough information to give you that discussion. But so this is more just high level. So the things that we will get into today, let's talk about the problem, the co-occurring problems as technology has become more online and more involved in our day-to-day lives. And we're spending more time on the different tech. So we'll kind of look at things that are occurring at the same time that our usage has increased. We'll look at the differences between abuse and addiction. So just looking at, what's functional versus dysfunctional, and what goes on kind of in our human condition, which is the stuff that's kind of in all of us versus our environment, and sometimes how our environment causes our human condition to change and, decide if that's functional or dysfunctional for yourself or your family, community. And then we'll talk about solutions, things that you can use and do for yourself, for your family, community, your educators within your school. We've given this talks at schools before. So just kind of thinking through individual interventions and community interventions. So, fun numbers that aren't that fun. 1 out of every 5 parents lets their kids under the age of 12 have and own a smartphone. The reason why 12 is that number, because I would imagine most 12-year-olds or younger that have a smartphone probably have some of the social media platforms. And so, it's actually against the law for the social media companies to have access, for them to have access to those platforms. Meta right now is certainly being sued by a lot of the attorney generals, whether you agree, it's fair or not. They're suing them under a couple of things. They're suing them under that they knowingly know and target kids that are under the age of 12, that they're developing products that they know that are harmful to children and teenagers' mental health. So they're using a lot of the same tactics they use to go after pharma with particularly the tacklers on the opioid side, the oxy side, and with the cigarette companies. So, sometimes it's a little harder to prove that this caused a mental health issue, but they certainly could go after them for that under the age of 12. And there's, we'll talk a little bit more. There's probably good reasons why we don't want kids on those platforms because of all the access that they have. And it's really hard for the mind to kind of distill down what is real and not real and not get upset or overly emotional about it. The average American, all of us, spend about 7 hours per day on the screen. That's not necessarily just doing schoolwork or doing your work. That's also spending a lot of time doing recreational screen time use. So it's not just performance-based screen time. 41% of us adults find it challenging to manage that device usage. The number keeps climbing. It gets harder and harder to not look, to not be distracted. Some of that switch cost of like looking here and then going over there and then having to go back. And kind of getting back up to speed. 75% of the parents allow children age 2 and under to have screen time. We'll talk a little bit about why that may be not in the best interest of that developing brain to do those things. So a lot of kids over here on the right, as you can see, how they go outside and play in quotes. And so this isn't to demonize anything. It's just saying be aware of the trade-off. If they're doing that, they're interacting, that can be a good thing, but maybe they also should put those down and go out and play some too. So to have that mix rather than just be the default, this is what we're always going to do. So it's really good, particularly not that long ago, where we could connect that way. It allowed us to connect. Kids could get on Minecraft and Fortnite and some of these other games that mimic roaming and task-oriented things that allow them to meet up with their friends and do things in a very social setting that more are kind of predisposed the way our brains like to do things and mimic that in an artificial world. So it's not something that is bad necessarily. You just have to kind of determine if it becomes dysfunctional or functional or not. Some of the experiments that they've been running of late, just kind of shows an idea of us as users. 70% of the people that were given a headline, and the headline was somewhat sensational, right? So it evoked something in them, or thought it may invoke something if they sent it ahead and forwarded it. 70% of them never opened the link to even read the article. They just sent it through. And the reason they knew this is because when you click on the link, it says this is actually not an article. So it just shows that sometimes, we can, even the fully developed people that haven't been raised on this text can get fooled too. I mean, up to 70% of us in that one experiment. Back in 2010, if you can think about, the smartphone came along around that time, 2009. It wasn't really adopted all that much. In 2010, we were on the internet, obviously, and Facebook, which is Meta, and some of the other companies, the social media companies, they were starting to gain traction and have some roots. And so back in 2010, you probably had an average around 130 friends. If you were a live audience, I'd ask you, raise your hand if you've got over 200, 300, 400. Your teenagers are 3 to 4 times that number of friends. So, up into the 400-500 range typically for them. And that can be across all platforms, right? So if Billy's a friend on Instagram, they also may be a friend on Snapchat. So not only the total number of people, not the total number on aggregate between all the platforms. So that's quite a big number to kind of keep up with as far as friends go. And so we'll talk a little bit about maybe the possible impacts of having that many friends that you consider friends. Because the wording is very important there. They're friends. They're not acquaintances. They're not people you kind of know, sort of know. Maybe you want to get to know. They're all called friends. So what happens and what they've noticed in monkeys, that the more monkeys you put in an environment, particularly once it gets over this 100 to 150 range, the increase in aggression that they are seeing in all the monkeys. And so, part of the theory behind that is that monkeys group, much like us, up until the last 200 years or so, the Industrial Revolution, we grew up in a really small pack, tribe, groups, whatever you want to call it. And it really didn't get much bigger than that unless you were in, truly big cities dating back always 200 years ago. So, there becomes a number where it is just really hard to keep up with everything. And so you just kind of think of our development as a species, like, if you didn't recognize somebody, then you were going to be suspicious of them. And you had to make sure that they were safe and safe for your group, that they weren't going to hurt you, attack you, cause harm, any of those kind of things. And so that's what they're seeing in the primates. And so brain is much more evolved than that, but in some ways it's not. And so kind of getting into this 100, 150 number, going back to how many friends do you have, it can be tough to keep track, and it may cause some sort of internal with you. And then this is also something that's, in all of us, some of these things, these mechanisms, these unconscious things, like we do, it's more of an unconscious thing, but that desire to punish rule breakers, you can see that our dopamine pushes us in that direction when we're doing these studies with these fMRI machines, and we can see what parts of the brain are lighting up. Like we can see that people get an unconscious kind of involuntary response system when they punish rule breakers. So it's not always intense. You can see a lot of this obviously going on these different platforms where there's a lot of people, if they did one thing, even if that thing was way back when, that it's getting punished and they are having consequences for that. Sometimes very great consequences. The other thing that's not on here is a lot of us are on Slack or Teams or whatever your communication platform is, software is for your company or maybe even your family. If you've got a text chain going or a text channel going, you know, generally speaking, since we are a cooperative species by nature, when something comes across, it's really hard for us not to pay attention because there's something inside of us that says, go. That's probably somebody that needs something from you. It's kind of like your kid calling you. It's hard not to look because it's just internal in us and instinctual in us as that kind of helping part of the of our brain. And so it becomes a distraction if you're paying attention to email or Slack or Teams all day because someone may always be needing something. And so in some instances, it's like someone coming and knocking on your door and sitting down and having a 2 to 3 minute conversation, getting up, and then someone else is coming in. And it's hard not to say no, and it's hard not to look away in those instances. So, from a productivity standpoint, Slack, the Teams, these different entities, softwares, they're not great for productivity. They're great for communication, but they're not great for productivity for that reason. And just so you know, just so I can catch up update, if you have questions, just put in the chat, Matt, and I'll stop right there and try to answer that question as we go. So this may be a little hard to see, but the important thing here is over on the left, this is depression. I could put a lot of graphs on here. I could put anxiety and some other illnesses that we're starting to see not just tick up, but exponentially increase. And so the red line is female, the green line is all gender, and the blue line is male. And so if you look down at the bottom, those are years. And so, once 2011, 2012 comes along, because most of us, when it comes to technology, we're not early adopters. We weren't the first people in line for the first iPhone. I would say most of us. So a lot of times it's like, well, I'll let somebody get that. Yeah, that was really cool. Maybe I should get one. And so the adoption of smartphones really didn't start taking place around 2012, 2013. And then as you'll see from the next graph, it just going almost to, most everyone has access or has a smartphone. More people have a smartphone and access to a smartphone than they do clean water in the world. So the red line doubles, right? So around 2012, it just starts spiking, as you can see. And so it went from about 12% of teenage girls dealing with depression to now it's almost 25, 26%. And that was in 2020. So that's pre-pandemic. And then you've got all genders, it doubles, and then males, it's around 4%, and in 2020 is around 7%. So not quite doubling, but close. And so you can infer how you want. This is just data that's tracked in these big national study of drug and use and health, and the NIH, and then the CDC. They track all these things over 1 and 2 year periods. And so you've seen this huge uptick around the same time that smartphones started getting adopted. The other line here, or the other graph, excuse me, is that adoption of smartphones. And so, I did a live talk yesterday to a bunch of nurses at Union County, and there were 3 people that raised their hand and a total of 5 people that everyone in the room knew that did not have a smartphone. The point is like, whether that's 80%, 90%, closer to 100%, we have widespread adoption of this technology. And then the red line could represent, in this instance, it represents alcohol teenage use. It could be drug use, it could be pregnancy, it could be time outside, whatever it is. As the smartphone gets adopted, all these lines decrease. And so, alcohol use, drug use, teen pregnancy, all these things drop, and are a really wonderful thing. It's just understanding particularly what is occurring at the same time and understanding the trade-offs. And it's not like you got to have one without the other. It'd be great to have, an increase in maybe technology use decrease in all these other things, but also a decrease in depression and anxiety all at the same time. That would be ideal, obviously. So just pointing out that, there's a lot of us that have access to this technology. It's in our hands quite frequently. It's in our hands quite frequently at an earlier age, and an earlier age, and an earlier age. So adoption isn't just co-adoption, but also adoption by people that are younger, kind of going back to that earlier comment of like 12 and under, who has a phone, who has access to a phone. And so this plays out over time, time and time again with all these different things that we see. Part of this is people are spending less time together. So since teens are together less, they're not drinking, they're not using drugs, they're obviously not getting pregnant because they're spending less time together, they're spending more time apart. We as a group are also doing that. So, you got human condition and you have environment. So the important implication on human condition is everything that you kind of show up with. It's all these biases that we'll talk about here in a minute. It is the mechanisms, our unconsciousness, it's the way our brain works, it's our predisposition to stuff, it's all the genetic encoding that was passed down to us through all these different wonderful family members. And so that's all the stuff that kind of like pre-rep in a way. And we can develop some of these other things, we can add on to them. And then you have environment. And so environment typically influences human condition. So, if the environment is highly stressful and it continues to be highly stressful, with the human condition, the genetic coding a lot of times will pop. And so some things will start becoming more prevalent over time. And that could be a mental health condition, it could be a health condition. And so environment generally is a stronger influencer over human condition. Some human condition is a stronger influencer of environment. So if you have someone that has ADHD and they're hyperactive, and most of the kids at kindergarten are sitting on the carpet listening to the teacher, you may have one or two that, despite the environment saying we're being quiet, we're being listening, we're taking our time, waiting our turn, their human condition is stronger than the environment because they're not able to sit still, they're not able to focus, they're not able to wait their turn. And so it can be, they could be very disruptive to the environment, but mostly the environment triggers the human condition. And so the tech companies understand the environment very well. They understand how to play the game. They understand human behavior, psychology, what's going to push people in a certain direction. I'll give you a little vignette that the credit card that we use, said this month you can go in and you'll get double miles or whatever for the amount of money you spend. And so, they're obviously planning on like November is a huge commerce month where a lot of money is spent. And so we want you to use our card to spend that money. And so it looks like a great deal. And it may cause some people to spend more money than they actually intended to spend because they think they're getting a better value for this turn, like airline points, airline miles. So they're setting up the environment constantly. They understand that when you are socially ostracized, because they have fMRI machines, so they're looking at the brain, they're studying what lights up, what goes dark, what will keep you engaged, what will keep you going longer, what kind of pain you need to experience to push you into action or push you away from action. And so they know that when we feel ostracized, we experience real pain. From an evolutionary standpoint, that is a very powerful thing because we do better when we have a group rather than when we're alone. The greatest study that we have today that just looks at the arc of human development says that the single number one determinant of lifespan and health span outside of not smoking cigarettes is the number of close relationships you have. The number of close relationships you have, and the more you have of them, the longer your lifespan and health span tends to be. And so if we're kicked out of the group, it causes a great deal of pain, like physical pain. That's why if your child loses a friend on social media, it may actually feel like they broke their arm to them. It may not make any rational sense to you, but it is some of that they're experiencing. Maybe it shouldn't be a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, but it's certainly higher than what you would maybe normalize to. And so we all feel this, but they being the young people, are even more susceptible to it. And so just understand that when something that seems benign and not a big deal actually feels like a really big deal to them. brain also has these parts of these neurons that get triggered, particularly as your tween turns into a teen. These really come online. They're somewhat dormant in childhood and that's why it doesn't seem like a big deal if they just kind of entertain friends and things like that. It seems like a huge deal when they're a tween and a teen because of this system coming back or not coming back online, but coming online. And that's just trying to push you to be with the crowd. That's why peer pressure is peer pressure. It can be positive peer pressure or negative peer pressure, but it's this human condition aspect of our human development. And you better well know that the tech companies understand the workings of the brain and how this part works and how to utilize that to create more opportunity for people to engage, to create more people so they don't feel the ostracism. So working off that pain center and then also working off of that dopamine center, pushing you into action to be a part of the crowd are things that they really well adapted to. We talked about holding the wrongdoers accountable, activate your dopamine reward system. It feels like you're doing the right thing. And generally speaking, we tend to think things as monoliths. The brain's not awesome at, being very nuanced unless you really practice doing it. So for instance, this past weekend, if you got a team you're cheering for and your team committed a foul and the other team committed a foul, well, the team that committed the foul that you don't cheer for was much more egregious than the one that you cheer for. And maybe they're cheaters, right? And so you kind of create this narrative because you see them as this, almost like a different species compared to how we behave, how we act, and so it's easy to kind of villainize or demonize that other side when we see things as monoliths. It's what's leading to a lot of the tribalism. Like it's you're either this or you're that. Like you're either pro this or pro that. And so it can get devolved, and they understand this. They understand how we think and how we can be. We don't think we're can be manipulated, but how we can be manipulated pretty easily through a lot of this psychological, behavioral, emotional activation system. So a lot of biases that they play on. I'm not going to go through all these one by one, but just understand they know this information. They know how to leverage it. And that's what they're acting on most of the time when they're sending you things that they're sending you, trying to get you to read things that you're seeing, or whatever the video is, or whatever the video game is that you're playing. It's designed to play off of these different biases to prove that you're right, to be able to think you can make a quick decision, to want to be liked. They know you want to be liked. So it's important that you be liked. And so, like, what's the right number for you to know that you feel secure in your tribe? And the idea is that it's never enough. You never have enough people, or you never truly feel settled. So you better check. You better make sure no one's made a negative comment about, something that you did or what you wore or any of this other stuff. And we tend to favor our group, kind of going back to like, if you're a Carolina fan, then Duke is Duke or state is state. And so we tend to look at our tribe very differently than the other tribe. We're very quick to judge others while giving our tribe a pass. And just by definition, we are negativity biased for very good reasons. Like we'd want to know if something's happening in the world from a negative standpoint. So we and the brain encodes that. So it doesn't turn into trauma, but it encodes that so we can remember that so it doesn't make the same mistake over and over again, because it would not be very, very beneficial from a biological survival standpoint. And so, they know all these games and how to play them and how to leverage them. And everyone I think I'm talking to is probably an adult and has, for the most part, a fully formed brain. We're always able to learn and change and do new things. But for young people who are growing up with full access to this all the time, they're not as aware, and it's much harder not to kind of fall into the hole that they're in, the trap that they're setting. So the Dunbar number, which I referenced earlier, all it is just a kind of way to think about how we develop as a species. And if you start left to right, left is your very best friends. It's people that you can count on anytime, people that you can be vulnerable with, share things with. They have your back no matter what. And then you go out from there. 15 are still the people that are really close to you. You spend weekends with them or go on vacation with them. Like, you enjoy their company. You're there. Maybe you'd call them up like, hey, I need help moving. Maybe they'd show up. Once you start getting out further, less likely they're going to show up and help you move. Less likely they may help you, paint the house, whatever it is that you're needing, all the way out to like, hey, this is a stranger. Obviously, they're not going to come over and help you move. And so what particularly social media has done is it has weighted all these numbers equally. So if you have a friend group in the social platforms of 500, whoever it is makes the comment and it's a negative comment, it feels the same as if it was in the group of five. And so why it matters and how many friends you have matters, because it's hard not to disassociate from that negative comment, even though in the true scope of things, maybe they're out closer to the 500 section. They feel just as powerful as someone that's in five. And so that going back to that negativity bias, that confirmation bias, all these different things like, hey, I'm going to go back at you go back at me. All these things start coming out, which increases engagement, which increases more time on the platform, which is helpful for the company that is the metric that they're measured by. And so it is very powerful when someone says something negative. And so it's hard for us a lot of times as adults not to fall into that trap. Is incredibly hard for kids not to fall into that trap and not see that the 500 shouldn't be the same as five. But the emotional reaction that occurs instantaneously is the thing that comes online first, and then maybe your brain kicks in second. But by then it may be compromised, and so you don't have full capacity to manage the problem because you're now kind of in fight or flight mode. So just know that whatever that number is, that number in a lot of instances, particularly for young people, has equal weight. And so now, things are starting to get weirder and weirder with AI because, I just heard something today that, there's a scam going around of people getting phone calls from their loved ones who sound like their loved ones saying, hey, I'm in a bind and can you send me a little bit of money? And some people are falling for it because the stuff's getting really good. And so it's going to get harder and harder to discern, is this a real friend? Is this a real person? Or is this a chat bot behaving in a particular way? So, this challenge is only going to get more challenging. And so that's why it's good to be educated about, who are your five, who are your 15, who are your 50, not who is your 500, who's your 1500, who's your, 3000. So what's the difference between abuse and addiction? Just kind of helping you understand what is functional, what is dysfunctional. There are some kids that can play Roblox and play for 3 hours and then, all right, it's time to get off, come to dinner, do your homework, whatever, and transition beautifully, no problem, right? And then there's some kids that there's one game on Roblox that is a hierarchy status game. And if you don't put enough time in, then your status will drop. They know this stuff. We are a hierarchical, status-driven kind of species, and so it's really hard to get off, even after 10 minutes, even after 20 minutes. And so it really boils down to the environment, and the environment could be Roblox itself. It could be the game on Roblox. It could be a certain aspect. It could be one particular social media platform. So it's really important to understand that this is nuanced. And so what is functional in one setting may not be functional in another. And it may not be functional for one kid versus the other. And so that's some of what we're doing today to kind of talk through that and talk about that. But just know that as a caveat starting into this conversation about abuse and addiction. So abuse is simply you're just starting to drift, spending more time on the devices. The devices could be video games, the devices could be social media, the devices could be email. Some people are addicted to email or Slack or whatever. So you're starting to spend more time. So that whole pie chart of how you spend your time, it's starting to eat away at these things. And so when it eats away, if it's in a dysfunctional way, it may be impacting some of these places here. So you may be sleeping less. If you have the phone by your bed, it's turned up and it can light up, that can impact your sleep because your eyelids can, even when your eyes are closed, your eyelids can detect light, and for a very good reason. From a kind of evolutionary standpoint, it'd be good that it could do that. It's not good if it's dark and you're supposed to be sleeping and the iPhone lights up, or the Android. I don't want to be just iPhone biased. But you're starting to isolate a little bit more, showing more distraction. So maybe you're not able to get into focus and stay in focus as long as you need. So your productivity is challenged, or you're using more energy to be productive, because you're kind of being drawn to this other thing, when it's not the time to be doing that. With a lot of kids, it's one of the beautiful things that they do for streaks to make that like, well, I got to keep that up. I don't want to break that, even though it's so arbitrary. But it's like, if you've had 10,000 steps each day, and like, well, it feels really good when your watch dings and says you got 10,000 steps today. And so our brains like that reward, that dopamine, so it pushes us into action and behavior. You just have to see, like, am I doing this, and am I doing it for the right reasons when it comes to those things? Using the number of friends, online friends, as a measuring stick, as a source of status, or the number of likes, mentions, whatever platform you're on, redistribute, distribute, can you say it? Retweeting, reforwarding, whatever it may be. Increasing our stress response, obviously. So maybe you're just more irritable. You're noticing the loved one is more irritable, a little bit more edge. When they put the device down, and it's a little harder to transition back into the world. And then, a lot of times, and these apps are kind of doing these for us. So particularly, you can see this with teenage girls, and young girls, that, the perfect look, and how a lot of the frames now will create that perfect look for you. And what that can do psychologically to someone that feels like they need to be holding to this image. It's generally not good, and it generally doesn't work out well over time. So when you think of addiction, it is truly what you think of. I mean, whether it's a substance use addiction or a process addiction like tech or porn, you're starting to see, and you are seeing behaviors that prioritize that addiction over anything else. Um, so lots of time on device, constantly checking, being ultra sensitive to any notifications to respond right away. And so you can see that in the number of pickups, you can see that in number of hours on device, you can see that with the number of hours on each app, in that screen time, parent screen time update. And so a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of prioritization is going towards this thing. And the thing could just be Instagram, or it could be Fortnite, or it could just be full blown, the whole thing, the whole gamut of platforms. But things are falling off substantially. So you're ignoring your work. You may be struggling with schoolwork. They may not be attaining the level that they should be. So just things are falling off because this other thing has the priority. And the dopamine system at that point is pushing action in that direction. It's not pushing it towards doing the schoolwork, doing the housework, doing the chores. So the dopamine system is firing in the opposite direction and giving you more reward than if you went and did schoolwork. It's not rewarding that from a dopamine standpoint. And so it's going to feel better to do the other thing. That's what causes the addiction. Just like substance use addiction, like it feels better to do the thing, and then over time, pain of not doing the thing is now worse than actually the dopamine that you get pushing you towards to do the thing. And so now it just becomes a way to try to catch up and not feel pain, rather than just feeling the enjoyment and sensation of the behavior. Lots of mood swings, lots more of isolation or spending more time online with online friends, loss of interest in the other things. So maybe you were well rounded, and your kiddo was well rounded, and now they're just wanting to do this thing. They're wanting to spend more time in the room on these devices doing these things. And a telltale is trying to cut back, and that being unsuccessful, or y'all maybe taking management over the device, and there's a lot of attempts to bargain. There's a lot of attempts maybe even to try to get it. I had one kid that was smart enough to call the internet company and get the internet switched over to his name with his name and password, but still keep the card on file. And his parents didn't find that out for a while. And so they're very smart, and Attic is very smart. When they want to get the thing that they need to get, they'll do whatever they can to get it. And so, you're going to see this show up in a lot of different ways. It may be so great that it's hard to ignore, whereas the abuse is like, oh, maybe we've got a problem, maybe it's emerging, how bad is it? And you have to do a little bit more detective work around that. Obviously, you're gonna have lack of sleep. They're gonna be very defensive about why they need it. Like, oh, I've got to have my alarm. I've got to be able to respond to this. Whatever the thing is, the excuse that they're throwing, that's what's happening. Then you're gonna have a lot of physical symptoms, and just from overuse, but just headaches. One of the byproducts is they're starting to think they know it's occurring. They're starting to think that it's occurring because of all of our uses on screens, and the smaller the screen, the worse it is for our eyes. But like our eyes are getting worse because it's inevitable that your eyes will have molecular degeneration over time. That timeline is shrinking because of the amount of time that we're using on devices. They think is one theory in the eye strain. So, and then you're going to see a lot of neglecting personal care and escaping problems. These technology can be great to move away from something that is stressful, as long as you don't need to move away from it, and as long as you're not doing it as a default every time you feel that distress. Then it becomes like this own little habit loop to move away from the thing that is uncomfortable. And that's not something we want to do over time. That's something we can do periodically to give ourselves and our brain a break, but we just don't want it to be the default and be the habit loop that gets built and developed. So as far as solutions go, we're going to talk about all three of these. If you ever hear me talk, sleep is always in there because it's by far the most important thing you can do. So we'll talk a little bit more about all that. I'm sure if you've heard me talk, this comes up a lot. This has nothing to do with technology and everything to do with your ability to fight, part of your unconscious, subconscious brain to make good decisions. So if you're well rested, you're going to perform better. I mean, that's indisputable. There's not a study on sleep anywhere that says the less sleep you have, the better you're going to perform, the better you work at cognitive tasks, and the less impulsive you will be. So getting the right amount of sleep is paramount for all ages. 7 to 8, but closer to 8 for us adults. There are no studies that says 5 hours of sleep is optimal. People can do it, but it's not optimal. Any more than, depending on how old your kids are, anywhere from 9 to 10, 11 hours, even more if you got the little ones. And so starting there allows everything just to kind of be built upon it. But if you don't, then it gets a little harder that day. And if you start stacking bad days or bad nights of sleep, it just becomes exponentially harder. So sleep. Having good social reciprocal relationships, preferably in person, or having a mix of in-person and hybrid of online is good, or having that person be a real person while also having that relationship be online. What I know a lot of kids do with school, and then they'll be online with each other doing something, Fortnite or on the social media. But having good relationships, kind of focused on that 5 and that 15, like we talked about in the Dunbar number. So you have people that have your back, care about you, that you can confide in, that you can help them, so you can get gratitude, give gratitude. All that just strengthens your brain, makes you less susceptible to want to go seek things in other places. And so social media is great for seeking things in other places, and sometimes video games is that too. Like you get attainment, you can rank up, you get hard, you get status. Like it's good if we can get those things in the real world and augment it some with stuff that's online. It's important to exercise. It's good for brain development, brain health. Goes back to making you less susceptible, make bad choices. Eating right, and eating the right food for you. You don't want to eat stuff that you're allergic to because it makes you more hyperactive. And that would push you and make you more impulsive, pushing you into these directions if you were having problems with technology. You want to do things that you're passionate about, and that stuff in the real world and in the online world. Like there's a lot of people that love coding, and it's it's a beautiful art, and it's certainly a worthwhile thing to know, to learn how to do, and it may be, something in the future that someone wants to do as a kid. So it just probably doesn't need to be the total pie of what they're doing in their time off any more than we'd want to exercise the whole time. So having a good balance on doing things that you enjoy doing and having a balance in those things, obviously doing things that have a level of challenge in the real world and online are fine. I mean, video games are very challenging. Like I was talking about, coding can be very challenging. Problem solving, whether that's online or in person, is very challenging. So those things are really important. And then, if you're taking medicine or supplements, take those things as prescribed. So that also gives your brain a good opportunity to be focused and centered and do what it needs to do. That's a perfect example of TikTok, right? Um, Kelly went and found that and kind of made the point of what we were trying to make here. So it's not these things are bad or good. It just depends the context and the environment and the human condition that is in that arena. So, if you're on TikTok, you awesome, go on TikTok. You probably don't need to be on TikTok for 4 hours. Or figuring out what you're giving up by doing that. And so TikTok's beautiful from a design standpoint. It gets you in quickly and keeps you there because the content is so interesting. It's so short form that you can just plow right through it, and before you know it, you've consumed a couple of hours on the device if you didn't intend to do so. But getting back to sleep, like I said, try to get those 8 hours if you can, particularly for the adults that we're talking to. Really important that you try to go to bed at the same time. It's more important to go to bed at the same time than it is to wake up at the same time, but if you can do both, like that's ideal. The same time is within a 30-minute window. If you've heard me talk about sleep, like, if you got a bedtime at 10, try to go to bed somewhere between 9:30 and 10:30. And so and I see your question. I'll come back to it here in a second. But there's a couple of beautiful things that happen if you hit that window, that hour window, 30-minute window on either side of your bedtime. Like one thing that happens, particularly for your young people, a growth hormone bolus is delivered, which does all the things that it's supposed to do for the developing body, developing brain. Um, the lymphatic system in your brain, the only way it can clear trash, cellular waste, is at night, or not at night, but when you're sleeping. And so if you miss the window, then it's almost like the trash truck comes and it doesn't take all the trash, it leaves some behind. And so you've got cellular waste left over from the day before, plus what you're going to accumulate that day. Why you will feel foggy, you will not feel as clear. And if you start stacking that, this is why in study after study that people that consistently get bad nights of sleep, they have a higher rate of incidence of dementia and Alzheimer's, because one of the ideas is that the cellular waste is continuing to back up, back up, back up, and it can't get cleared. And then the other cool thing that happens is if you're, in my iPod case, is like a zip drive. When you walk around all day learning novel things, that information gets downloaded in the zip drive. And so when it's time to go to bed, you, in a sense, kind of plug that zip drive into your neocortex, and that information gets downloaded. The information that's getting downloaded is novel information. So if you learned something new today, you remembered it, it got stored, and then you go to bed in that 30-minute window, that information will be downloaded correctly. If you miss the window, the zip drive is not going to have an opportunity to download completely. So if you think of like a task like school where they're learning something new every day and just kind of stacking one lesson on top of the other, that can be challenging because in a sense you've kind of got to play catch up for what you learned the day before for whatever didn't get downloaded and remembered. And so you have to relearn on top of what you're already learning, which is new stuff. So it makes it challenging from a lot of different points if you miss those windows of opportunity to go to sleep. Refrain from exercise 2 hours before bed. That's because your core temperature gets up when you exercise. We want it to drop. That's why we like to lower the temperature at night. You need your body temperature to drop between 1, 2, 3 degrees. That way you can kind of turn into that bear that's hibernating. That's also why you would not want to take a cold shower at night, because it sends signals to your body that you need to heat up your internal temperature, your internal core, whether a warm shower sends signals to your body. I know it seems opposite, but it sends signals to your body that you are good, you are warm, and it can continue to kind of distribute warmth all over the body rather than just securing the internal organs. Limit the melatonin intake. The melatonin is meant for mediating, much like an Advil or ibuprofen is meant to mediate a headache. But if you got a headache every day, you wouldn't want to continue to take ibuprofen unless a doctor, said, hey, this is the regimen that you need to follow. You'd probably want to modulate, which means you got to figure out why you're having a headache. Is it stress? Is it, something health related? You need to go to the doctor, get that checked out, because it's not a long-term solution to continue to take ibuprofen every day. Melatonin, your brain has the ability to secrete melatonin naturally. So if you wake up in the morning, get some exposure to sunlight, it triggers your deoxine system. That takes on all day, starts developing. That's why you don't want to have the caffeine 10 hours before bed. Normally, for most people, some people get away with it. And then in the evening, when the sun is also setting, it's triggering your natural melatonin receptors to start secreting melatonin. And so with the deoxine and the melatonin, and there's some other hormones involved here, but just high level, like those two things work together to make a really nice cocktail to help you stay asleep. And the deoxine melatonin helps you fall asleep. The deoxine helps you stay asleep, to go through all these different cycles that you need to go through. And so, one thing with the melatonin, it's not regulated by the FDA. So unless you're getting a third-party melatonin supplement, you don't know exactly what is in the bottle. It's kind of like olive oil. Like they say it's 100% extra virgin olive oil, but study after study says that it's not. So that's one thing. You may be getting more, you may be getting less. But in some studies, people, particularly kids that are taking melatonin, it's shown that it's disrupting their natural melatonin receptors, and it's also showing in some studies that is impacting puberty in a negative way. Like anything, like if you're gonna get vitamin D, it's good to get it from the sunlight. If you're getting vitamin C, it's good to get it through, citrus, rather than just taking a supplement. And like the body does better when it's absorbing things naturally. So if you can get your body in the rhythm of in the morning, get sunlight, do all the things you need to do that we're talking about here, get it in the evening, and do all the things we're talking about here, like your body can modulate over time to start doing what it's supposed to do. In most cases, that's not true for everyone, nothing is, but just in most cases, that's how that works. Yeah, and for sure, the ADHD meds, like that's the kind of trade-off, right? Sometimes people that take ADHD meds, that stimulant, depending on what they're taking, and their brain and their body at that time in their life has a hard time getting into sleep. So, for that individual, they may need to take melatonin. Completely understand. It's just this is more talking to everyone from a very broad perspective, not just the one individual. Happy to answer any questions around one individual if you have that, but just generally speaking, right? I mean, just generally speaking, a lot of the things that we're talking about is meant to kind of hit everyone that we're speaking to. The tips and tools with this stuff, there is no one size fit all. The American Pediatric Association used to have like a number, like no more than this number. They have now removed that because it's not straightforward. It kind of goes back to like 10 minutes on a particular thing, maybe too many. They may not be able to go on that platform or that video game ever. Depending on their human condition and their human condition's reaction to that environment. So that's why there's not, these guidelines. I mean, there's probably a general idea of like, this idea of like under 12, because of the way the brain develops and the way the neural networks develop and things like that. We don't want to set that off to that anymore. Like, we want kids to delay substance use as long as they can, because it allows their neural network to develop in a very healthy way, any more than we don't want kids to look at porn, even though the average age is like 8 or 9 now. Like, because having the brain develop in a dysfunctional dopamine specific way. And so that's why there's no one size fits all. There's no perfect number. It's taking it's taking the human condition, it's taking the environment, and understanding how those two things are at play. And like I just talked to some parents today, and they're like, what about our 13-year-old and having his phone in the room at night. And, generally speaking, I can't think of a good reason to have for a teenager, particularly a young teenager, to have their phone in their room at night. It's too hard not to look if you don't have parameters on that and controls on that. It's just too hard for them. It's asking them, it's the marshmallow test. It's like, how many, if you wait right here, I'll give you two marshmallows if you can wait 5 minutes. And the marshmallow test, most kids couldn't wait, the 5 minutes to get two marshmallows. They just went ahead and took both and could not show a control to that impulsivity. And so these work in the same way for a lot of people. So there may be some hard and fast things to consider, but there's also a lot of nuance in the middle. Just understand what's happening when we're on these things, and the incentives that the companies have. I mean, they are. I know Meta dropped a little bit, but when you go to Alphabet, which is Google, and you go to Microsoft, who is has a huge stock in OpenAI now, and Meta, and then all these kind of social platform companies. I mean, they're in the top 10 companies in the world as far as wealth. And so there's a lot of money that is incentivized for them to get people to consume. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just understanding what you're doing when you're doing it and the trade-off you maybe have. Like if you're standing on the sideline at your kid's soccer game, is that and watching something on YouTube or whatever, like, is that what you should be doing? And it's really hard sometimes not to do that. I mean, just drive around the city right now. It feels like there's a lot of people on their phones. I can't wait to get to the stoplight to pick it up, or they continue to watch even though they're driving. So just being aware of the trade-offs that you're involved in, that your family's involved in, and just decide when something is functional or dysfunctional. Moderation, like I said, varies based upon each individual situation. Moderation to one could look very different to another. And that could look very different in between your kids as well. So it can make it a little challenging. You as parents, you are incredible role models. So what you do really, really matters, and what you say matters a little less than what you do. And so, we are just kind of social creatures that observe and not always listen. And so, what you're doing at the dinner table, what you're doing in the car, what you're doing on the sidelines, to use that example, really plays, particularly when you're trying to parent this stuff. And a lot of adults are struggling with these behaviors and putting it down and not looking and being involved. You as a family, as an individual, decide what oversight you need on yourself. There's plenty of apps that tell you, every couple of minutes if you want to, like, hey, you've been on your phone for X amount of minutes. You might want to think about putting it down. All the way to give me a rundown every day of how I'm doing, or how my family's doing. Like, there's plenty of ways to have controls over this stuff. And it doesn't have to be too invasive. Some of the times it's just like a flashing light, like, hey, speed limit's changing, be aware. And sometimes that's enough to kind of break up, what we're doing and the behaviors that we're showing. You can change your notification settings. 2/3 of us never change the notification settings. You can back them, get them all at once, decide when you want to get them, decide which ones you want to get, which ones you don't want to get. Delete all unnecessary apps. If your kids are getting apps, make sure you understand the app that they're getting is really the app that they're getting. Know the information about it, how it works. You don't have to read the whole privacy policy, but if you have access to ChatGPT, you could actually put that privacy policy in ChatGPT, and you could ask them, what things should I be concerned about, worried about as a parent, from a privacy standpoint, and it'll give you a really nice summary of that. So that's a nice way of using technology for your advantage. You can even build a chatbot if you have access to the enterprise version of ChatGPT to create that chatbot. So you could put a document in there every time and say, what should I be worried about with this? How should I think about this from a privacy standpoint? And just be mindful of that infinite scroll. Like, they got rid of that a couple years ago. We just kind of keep going if we want to. The road never ends. It's a beautiful design. We just have to decide if we want to get off the road or not. Clear rules around technology and what is approved. Make sure you, like I said, have those parental controls in place. If you need to lock things down, understand what they're doing, how they're doing it, how much they're doing, those kind of things. understand that particularly for our young people and even for us too, but coming off of the device isn't as simple as just putting it down for some people because you're getting a good deal of dopamine delivered to your system. And in some instances in our young people, it's called the vitreous striatum, but there's so much dopamine coming through that canal that the canal is widening because of the amount of dopamine coming through. So it's causing structural changes in the brain. That's probably a brain that is addicted rather than someone that's abusing. But to just kind of cut that off and say here and now, go figure it out, that's gonna be a really hard thing. And you're gonna see a lot of friction with that transition time. So, if you've got someone that struggles with, coming off their device, you'd want to have some things in place, kind of like a buffet of choices that they can get into and do to kind of give them some access to dopamine. It's not going to be as great as what they were getting, but it's also not going to fall off a cliff. So if go build Legos, go outside, go ride your bike, if you're in the car, coming up with some other things that they can do that's not device oriented if you're wanting them to come off the device. So not just pulling the plug, but having them come down slowly rather than fall off the cliff. Keep the eyes arm distance away, kind of goes back to that eyesight thing. You can make the text bigger so you don't have to strain as much. That's good for the eyesight stuff. And then every 20 minutes, the 20-20-20 rule if you want. Every 20 minutes, stand up, kind of remove yourself from the things. Good to have that mental kind of detox for a minute, even if you're just doing it for 20 seconds, and then stare 20 feet away. That helps kind of trigger a lot of the mechanisms in your brain as far as the dopamine systems go and the cortisol and the adrenaline and things like that. So it's just a nice way to give yourself a break. That's it. As far as that goes, happy to answer any specific questions or broad questions that you have. If you're not new to our organization, we have these free ebooks. It's also a way to get on the newsletter list to sign up and get the next talk, which will probably be in December. I don't think we've set that yet. And then anything else that's going on with the company. That's a nice way to do that. And that's available to you on the website too for anyone that is listening to this as a recording. We do have a bunch of other talks. If you ever want us to come out and talk to your school or your business or your church group, we love doing that. And we've done that a bunch. And we have a bunch more lined up this year and next year. So, and then we'll continue to do these internally for our customers and our partners. And so if there's something that you would like to learn more about, we're never opposed to creating a talk for that. And just give you the information. It's a good way for us to learn and a good way for us to get that information out to the community. And in case you didn't know, for any of those that are part of our LMB counseling family as far as clients or family members, like we are hiring a psychiatric physician assistant. They're going to start in January. They'll be able to prescribe medication because it's a huge need in the community right now. So I hope we make a little dent in that. And that's it. That's all our stuff. If you have questions, you can unmute if you want, or you can put in the chat. And for anyone that's listening, you can just go to the website there and you can either go to contact us or you can go to the email, which is my email, and you can put in questions that way. Or if you're wanting to have us come out and talk to anybody that you may know, any organization, you can do it that way as well. Thank you all for being here. Hope y'all have a nice day. It's supposed to be a nice day. Get outside if you can. And everyone enjoy your turkey day. All right. Take care.